In this episode of Sushasan, we have with us a career civil servant, somebody who spent long 38 years as an IAS officer in Uttar Pradesh and then with the Government of India. While in civil services, he was known for three things: being an upright officer with the highest levels of integrity, somebody who could actually get things done inside the government, and somebody who would speak his mind and not hold back a punch. Even after his retirement, he continues to do so through his books, through his columns, and through his public speaking at conferences and forums. I am talking about Mr. Anil Swarup. In this episode of Sushasan, we unpack his journey of 38 years as a civil servant and tap into his vast and varied experiences in the civil services. Do watch out this episode of Sushasan. Very warm welcome to you, Mr. Swarup. Really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
So 38 long years, right? If you were to just reflect on this long journey of almost 4 decades, what's the macro thought that you have in your mind?
The first thought that comes to my mind is I enjoyed every moment of it. Every moment of it. And that is why I say that if I were to be born again, I'd like to be an IAS officer all over. Because there's no other service that I can think of that can give as many opportunities to do good, to do bad, as would be the IAS.
That's a strong endorsement of the civil services, right? Also, it comes with I can hear a lot of satisfaction in your voice. काफी संतोष है आपकी आवाज में. तो एक एक करके बात करते हैं. I'll start off with your stint in the Government of India first. One thing that you are known for is your stint as Coal Secretary. That's first thing that comes to mind. I remember this is 2014 when the current Modi government came into power. The coal sector was in a mess, to put it mildly. The CAG had intervened, the Supreme Court had intervened, all the coal block allocations have been kind of cancelled. No bureaucrat wanted to get in the coal ministry to put pen on paper because everyone kind of feared the CBI, the ED and all of that. And you were almost handpicked by the government at the time, by the Prime Minister's office at the time, to clean up this mess. Right? So firstly, what was your first reaction when you got this assignment? What was the mess? What was the real mess? How did you go about kind of cleaning that up?
You know, when I was posted as Coal Secretary Government of India, at that point in time, I didn't know much about the coal sector. So I rang up a friend of mine. मैंने कहा यार ये सेक्टर कैसा है? तो उसने जवाब तो दिया नहीं, एक प्रश्न कर दिया मुझसे पूछा गैंग्स ऑफ वासेपुर देखी है क्या? You know, that said everything because I had seen that movie and I knew what mafias can do, could do, and that's precisely what they were doing in coal. But you know, as I walked into the office of Coal Secretary for the first time, I felt I was walking into a graveyard. Because CBI was after files, after officers. More than anything else, there was total lack of trust. There was total lack of confidence. But having evolved as an officer who had faced not exactly this situation, this was probably the worst of the lot, I thought, यार स्थिति अब इतनी खराब है, अब और तो खराब होगी नहीं. अब जो होगा अच्छा ही होगा. So I can walk away with that credit. So with that frame of mind, I got into the department. And by God's grace, I had an absolutely amazing team. I mean, we used to jokingly say after having sorted out the coal mess, which I'll tell you how we did it, we used to jokingly say, give us the Kashmir problem, we just might be able to solve it. That's the confidence that we had developed. And as luck would have it, one of my joint secretaries who played a very important role in sorting the coal mess, he's presently Home Secretary, Government of India, handling Kashmir problem. And other joint secretary was till very recently Additional Chief Secretary, Jammu and Kashmir. So I used to joke and they actually were there to sort the Kashmir problem out. But jokes apart, I think when I came over here, as was my habit, I wanted to analyze the cause of the problem. Everyone thought it was the coal block allocation that was the problem. So when I tried to understand the issues here, मुझे समझ में आया जो सबसे गंभीर समस्या थी कि ये जो कोल ब्लॉक एक्शन में गड़बड़ी हुई वो क्यों हुई? वो इसलिए हुई कि कोल की कमी थी. Had there been no shortage, there would be no mafias, there would be no coal block allocation. So the cause of the problem was shortage of coal. Then I went to the next layer. Why is there shortage of coal? भाई समस्या क्यों है? I discovered that India sits on 300 billion tons of coal and we required only about 800 million tons per annum. So there was sufficient coal available. So why then is there a shortage of coal? We went to the next layer. And the next layer was that though coal was available, land acquisition was a major issue. So there were three primary problems. There were other problems also. जो प्रमुख समस्याएं थी, there were three. That is land availability, because land acquisition was a serious issue. Then most of this coal existed in forested areas. So getting forest and environment clearance. And third, because of the location of the coal, evacuation of coal was very, very difficult. So we then went to the next layer. How do I solve the problem of land acquisition? How do you fast track forest and environment clearance? How do you evacuate coal? And for that, probably I did things which I would not have imagined earlier. As coal secretary, I did not convene a single meeting in Delhi. All these meetings were held at the state level, because I came to the conclusion very soon that most of the problems are there in the field. So I have to go there and talk to them. And that really helped. People ask me, if you were to point out one action that you took was critical in solving the coal mess, it was this one. Not to call secretaries of the state government to Delhi, but going down to the states, meeting with the chief ministers, chief secretaries, and I could convey a value proposition to them. What was in it? I mean, this is very fundamental. For finding solution to any problem, first one has to look at the why of the problem, and then when you identify the stakeholders, you have to convey a value proposition to those stakeholders for them to do what you want them to do. So I'll give you an example here. I mean, there are many, many problems in the state, but I think one of the biggest problems was with West Bengal government, because the West Bengal government was up against the central government for whatever reasons, good, bad or ugly. Now, how do you get land for coal block mining, for coal mining from a state like West Bengal? Totally, they were going hammer and tongs at each other. So what I did was I spoke to the chief secretary, then went over to Calcutta, had a chat with him, and I had a piece of paper with me in which I had written how much the state government is losing per day by way of revenue, by way of direct and indirect employment, by not giving me the land which is not being put to use otherwise. So somehow I managed to convince the chief secretary. I don't know what he did to the chief minister. We got the land. So I'm giving you just one illustration to convey to you how a difficult problem like coal, because I remember in the beginning, there was total maramari. The chaos was to an extent that I used to get calls from chief ministers. So Bombay chief minister, Mr. Fadnavis had just taken over as the chief minister of Maharashtra, and he rang me up at 12 o'clock during the day and said, Anil ji, आप क्या Bombay आ सकते हैं? हमने सर क्या हो गया? बोले यहाँ तो बहुत क्राइसिस है कोयल की, 2 दिन 3 दिन का कोयला बचा है, हमें कोयला चाहिए. तो हमने कहा सर आ जाएंगे, कब आएँ? बोले आज आ जाइए आप. और 12 बज रहा है दिन का, और आज आ जाइए आप. तो मैंने कहा अब तो टाइम बने नहीं, आ जाइए रात को कर लेंगे बैठक. तो आई टुक द 4 o'clock फ्लाइट, लैंडेड इन मुंबई अराउंड 6:15, went straight to the hotel. The meeting started at 8 o'clock, carried on till late in the night, 12 o'clock. We found some solutions. Next morning I had to take a 6 o'clock flight back to Delhi because there was a meeting at the PMO for discussing the coal crisis. So this was the nature of the crisis. I have given you some isolated example to illustrate how.
So this is very powerful, because a lot of time Government of India can come up with grand schemes and solutions and so on. Till the time you are able to take the states along, most of the things will not kind of get to fruition. And especially, I would imagine something like coal block, coal, a lot of the coal is in the eastern part of the country. You're talking about Odisha, Chhattisgarh, West Bengal, Jharkhand. These are also states which didn't have the government of the ruling party at the time. That also just increases the problem that much more. So this whole thing around going to the states versus kind of getting them, I think that's very powerful, and that's applicable in a lot of different scenarios. You got support in this from the political leadership in the Government of India?
Total.
Can you, any
Total
anecdote, any
instance? I distinctly remember whether it was the Prime Minister or my Minister, I mean, I could get away with anything. It was incredible, the support that I got, because there was a very serious crisis. But there could have been issues where they could have said, do this, do that. No, I was given a total carte blanche. I could mark my own journey, my own processes, do what I wanted to do. I was given total freedom and total support. And there were issues where when the bill was introduced in the parliament, the ruling party did not have majority in the Rajya Sabha, and many bills were falling apart.
Yes.
So we had to get it clear. So I suggested to my minister that I'd like to call on the leader of opposition. Now this was a political move, so to say. Why? Because Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge was leader of the opposition. I had worked with him earlier. I had a good personal rapport with him. So I utilized that relationship, and Mr. Piyush Goel immediately agreed, yes, please go and meet him. I mean, there could have been an issue here, there, but I'm glad to say that I got total support from the government to do what I wanted to do. You know, without political support, taking huge decisions, big decisions, charting out a course for yourself is not possible in a democracy, and rightly so.
I've also heard in the past, I don't know where you narrating this incident where Mr. Arun Jaitley got involved at the time for Odisha.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Can you share that?
What we were trying to do was to get support of so-called opposition parties in the parliament, and this was the strategy by the master strategist I called Mr. Arun Jaitley. He himself was talking to the chief ministers, and because the idea was to at least get into a conversation with those that were opposed to what we were doing. And that was a great thing. I learned that instead of unnecessarily fighting with people around, we can find some common ground even with people we have strong differences of opinion. And he was a master strategist. So I remember that in one of those Sundays when I felt a bit free and I was driving down to Gurgaon with my family on some personal visit, I got a message that Mr. Arun Jaitley wanted me to come over to his residence. So I came back, left the family at home, and then drove down to his residence. And there, Mr. Naveen Patnaik, Chief Minister of Odisha, he was sitting. Mr. Arun Jaitley was sitting. Mr. Piyush Goel was there. And I was asked to explain to Mr. Naveen Patnaik value proposition regarding coal block auction and his support for the bill. So I started by telling him that this will be beneficial to Odisha. So the Chief Minister of Odisha said, how? So I explained to him how it would be beneficial. So when I gave him a few numbers, he said, is that so, Mr. Swarup? How is that possible? So suddenly I remembered that at that point in time, there was an auction going on. And since it was all digital and available on the web, I took out my phone and showed him actually how the auction was happening, and a Odisha mile was being auctioned. And as he was watching that, it went up by a ticker by 2 rupees. So he said, it has gone up by 2 rupees. I said, this translates into 50 lakhs of rupees for Odisha. And then he asked me, how much are we likely to get as a consequence of this entire auction? I said, sir, it's very difficult for me to conjecture because the auction is still on. He said, give me some ballpark figure. So I explained to him, I gave him this number. He said, is that so, Mr. Swarup? And then I made this statement. I told him, sir, all the auctions that are happening, not a single penny will come to the government of India. Entire money is going to the state government. Is that so, Mr. Swarup? And that was the last, is that so, Mr. Swarup? And next day, he supported the bill. So all credit to Mr. Arun Jaitley. He had the sagacity, he had the vision. It was a pleasure. He was not my minister directly, he was finance minister. But what guidance one got from him, I can't forget that.
This is fascinating. The power of communication, taking stakeholders along when you do something that complex and that big. Great. Let me move on to another piece of work that you are kind of closely associated with, which is the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. Right? That was the first successful large-scale implementation of health insurance in the country. It subsequently informed, in some sense, the design of Ayushman Bharat also, which is one of the flagship programs of the current Prime Minister. Firstly, I was looking at your postings and you were never in the health ministry, right? From what I know, you were never really in the health ministry, but still you were anchoring the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana. So I'm a little intrigued, how did that happen? And what was the design of it? I know that it was a massive scale, but what was the scale, what was the design of RSBY?
It has a very interesting background actually. I was in labor, as it were, in the Ministry of Labor and going through painful existence without delivering anything. And suddenly the Prime Minister announced a health insurance scheme for the poorest of the poor. And as was the wont at that point in time, after every such announcement, there was a group of ministers set up. And this group of ministers was chaired by Mr. Chidambaram. And in the first meeting, my minister was supposed to go there. He couldn't go, the secretary couldn't go. So I was deputizing for them. I had no clue as to what's going to happen in the meeting. But since my minister was a part of a group of ministers, so I was there, sitting there. In one corner, in government, you sit by hierarchy. So I was probably the junior most officer sitting there in one corner. And the meeting started, so Mr. Chidambaram turned towards the health secretary and asked him that the Prime Minister has announced this health insurance program. Why don't you come up with a paper in the next meeting with the details and we'll discuss that. So the health secretary tried to wriggle out. He said, sir, we are already busy with National Rural Health Mission and so health insurance is not doing anywhere well in the world. sir, if you could spare us. So for some, which I later on conjecture that it would have been political, health ministry was spared of that scheme. He turned towards his right, towards the head of the organization of banking and insurance, and asked him that it's insurance scheme, so you do it. He said, sir, well, we are already saddled with a universal health insurance scheme and it's going nowhere, we're finding it very difficult. Now, the meeting came to a standstill because both the primary ministries
were not willing to
washed their hands off because they knew how complex it was. Suddenly, somebody whispered something in the ears of Mr. Chidambaram, who was sitting next to him. And I heard my name announced. Who is Anil Swarup? So I stood up with my folded hands, sir, I am Anil Swarup. You will do this scheme. I said, sir, but I am already in labor, I am already in pain. What do you mean already in pain? This is a scheme. I said, sir, but this is a health insurance scheme. No, this scheme is for workers. And you are Director General Labour Welfare, so it's welfare of workers. So I told him, sir, by that logic, all schemes of the government should come to me because every scheme is for some worker. This is what you're joking. No, you'll have to do it. So I came out of the room like a zombie. What had hit me? So I went and asked my wife, do you know anything about health insurance? He said, मुझे क्या पता? No, but चिंता नहीं करो, कुछ ना कुछ हो जाएगा. That was the beginning of health insurance. Remember, again, God has been very kind to me during my career. I found people in the World Bank, in ILO, who helped me get expertise. And then the scheme evolved. Now, we had three fundamental aspects to look into it. I was convinced that if you are going to make a scheme for anybody, I have to look at the consumer, the ultimate beneficiary, and then design the scheme. Not the other way around. Sitting in Delhi, have that wisdom and work out as you know. So we looked at the target group, and the target group was that this person who was poor, since he was poor, he could not make payments upfront to the hospital and claim it from the insurance company. So the insurance scheme had to be cashless. This was not difficult because there were cashless health insurance schemes. The second one was that he was illiterate. Most of the, below poverty line are illiterate. Now, insurance documents are long, tiny. I mean, none of us reads those documents. So the insurance scheme had to be paperless. Now, this was very difficult. Because nowhere in the world was there a paperless health insurance scheme. Nowhere. So we had to evolve a paperless. And even more difficult was the third part. Most of these workers migrated from one place to the other temporarily or permanently to seek benefit. Now there was no scheme in the country where the benefits were portable, meaning thereby, whether it is PDS or MNREGA, you could get benefit in the district you are, but once you traveled outside, at that point in time, you could not get the benefit. So how to make them portable? So there we use technology to bring in a paperless scheme, cashless portable. And portable scheme. I think that was the hallmark of the scheme. And as I rightly said, though the scheme was in a limbo for a few years when the new government came, after 3 years or so, and I distinctly remember that time when I got a call from Prime Minister's office asking me to come over and explain health insurance to the Prime Minister. So I told the PMO that
Current Prime Minister. Yeah.
I told the PMO that I am an education secretary. What is my lowest standard? He said, no, you come over and try and explain if he asks you. So I said, how can I come? Then I was told that there is a review of health ministry and they will also have a review of education ministry. So you'll be present. In case the Prime Minister asks you, we explain. So I went there in the meeting in the evening. The health secretary made a presentation. Prime Minister didn't look convinced. The idea was exactly the same which I had, which is insurance model. And somehow the Prime Minister was not very convinced about the insurance part of it. So then he turned towards me, Anil ji, aapka kya raay hai iske baare mein? Aap rahe hain insurance mein. So I started, and this is 3 months before my retirement. So I explained to him in 15 minutes, I spoke him, saying, ek tak mujhe sunte rahe. At the end of it, he says, Anil ji, aap theek keh rahe hain. That day Ayushman Bharat was born. And the interesting feature was, I was coming out, Joint Secretary to PMO, he said, sir, आपको तो पता था कि PM साहब नाराज हो जाते हैं इंश्योरेंस मॉडल में, फिर भी आपने वो बात कह दी. हमने कहा, देखो यार, मुझे ना उनसे आज कुछ लेना है, ना रिटायरमेंट के बाद कुछ लेना है. जो मैंने ठीक समझा उनको बता दिया, अगर वो अच्छा लगता ठीक था, नहीं लगता तो उनका. But I gave him the advice that I thought was the best.
Yeah. What was the scale of RSBY? Just to put that in.
We covered at that point in time 350 million people. almost a third of India's population at that point.
That's massive. So would you say this has been one of the most satisfying impact that you've had in your entire career?
Undoubtedly. It was amazing sense of satisfaction. And that is the time when I thought there can't be a better service than the IS. Because, people do very good things. It's not that others are not doing. But the impact that you can create is absolutely amazing.
An impact at scale.
Impact at scale, and some of the personal experiences that I had were absolutely phenomenal. I still get goosebumps recounting. This scheme came to be recognized world over as one of the finest schemes. I remember I get a call from one of the advisors of Obama who had just taken over as president.
And healthcare was
there was trouble there. So he said, Mr. Swarup, can you come over to Washington and make a presentation on your health insurance scheme? I said, I have nothing to offer. This is a different context. I wanted to wriggle out. No, but if you come to Washington, it would be great if you can make a presentation. So it's one of my visits to Washington. I used to interact with World Bank. I went over to Brookings Institute, where I made a presentation on this health insurance scheme, where, representatives of the federal government, the state government, our own mission people, as well as representatives of Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, they were sitting there. So I made a presentation. So I came out of the room after the presentation. We are having a cup of coffee. This gentleman from Gates Foundation walks up to me and asks me, Mr. Swarup, you seem to be very passionate about this scheme. What does the government give you beyond your salary? A very interesting question. What does the government give you? So I paused for a while. And then I asked him a counter question. I asked him, Gates Foundation gives millions of dollars to poor countries. What do you get out of it? He said, well, that's a job. But more than that, we derive a lot of satisfaction out of helping the poor. I said, you answered your own question. This RSBY, the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, is meant for the poorest of the poor, many of whom would have been dead but for this scheme. So the good wishes of those that survived and their families come back to me somehow, anyhow. That's good enough a kick for me to do what I'm doing. I use the word kick here. And then to illustrate the point, I narrated an incident to him. I told him I used to visit, these small hospitals that are empaneled in RSBY. And in one of the visits to these hospitals, I was talking to a beneficiary patient when I heard a very feeble voice from behind. Beta idhar aao. So I was narrating to him in English, but I will narrate here in Hindi because that's how the conversation happened. Beta idhar aao. So I turned around and saw a very old lady. She couldn't sit. She was just flashing the smart card and calling me Beta idhar aao. So I went to her, I bent down and I asked her, Mata ji, aap theek to hain? She told me, Beta, main bahut takleef mein hu, lekin in hospital walon ne mera bada khayal rakha. So I told her, फिर तो माता जी आप ठीक हो जाएंगी, आप अपने घर जाएंगी. नहीं बेटा, मेरी तो उम्र इतनी हो गई, अब मैं ऊपर वाले के पास जाऊंगी. ऐसे नहीं माता जी, आप बिल्कुल घर जाएं. नहीं, मेरा तो ना कोई बेटा है ना भाई, मेरा कोई नहीं है इस दुनिया में. मैं तो भीख मांगती थी. मैं बीमार पड़ गई तो मेरा पड़ोसी था, वो भी भीख मांगता था. उसने तुम्हारा ये कार्ड देखा और मुझे अस्पताल में ले आया. यहाँ ये सब मेरी सेवा कर रहे हैं और मुझसे पैसा भी नहीं मांगते. ऐसा, हाँ माता जी, ये बहुत अच्छा, आपको यहाँ कोई पैसा देने की जरूरत नहीं, आप ठीक होकर जाएंगी. नहीं बेटा, मैं ऊपर वाले के पास जाऊंगी. This carried on for 15 seconds and then she made a remarkable statement. She says, ऊपर वाले जाके एक बार जरूर कहूँगी, तुम्हारी स्कीम बहुत अच्छी है. When I narrate such incident, even now I get goosebumps. So I call them my Bharat Ratnas in my...
nothing can be more satisfying than really hearing from the people who are benefiting from it. And you know that there's so many of them. Fascinating. One more thing I thought I'll talk about, and this is the time from the UPA 2 government, when I know there was something that was set up called the Project Monitoring Group, PMG, with the idea of fast tracking or clearing some of the large projects that were stuck. And all of us know the environment that was there at the time, and it was not the government was on the back foot. There were all the scams going around in the air, so much of negativity. I know now the current Prime Minister does something called Pragati, where a lot of the large infrastructure projects are cleared by having all the stakeholders in the room. But it was actually something that started at the time as PMG by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and you were heading the Project Monitoring Group. Can you just share that? How did, in that environment, and from I know it was successful, so how in that environment you could kind of actually get clearances to happen when nobody wanted to again put pen to paper?
When I got to know of this, it was by way of message sent to me when I was in Cambodia. I had gone there to make a presentation on RSBY. And I got a message that the cabinet secretary wanted to talk to me. So I tried to reach him from Cambodia, I couldn't. So when I landed in India, I rang him up. This was evening. And I knew the cabinet secretary otherwise, but professionally I had never interacted with him. I mean, I was a joint secretary then, maybe just No, I had become
Additional
additional secretary. And so I rang up his office. So they put me across immediately to the cabinet secretary, which I was very surprised, and said, Anil, kal tum zara ek cup chai peena aa jao subah. So, this was the first ever offer made by cabinet secretary for a cup of tea to me. So I was a bit, I didn't know how to react. I said, हाँ sir, but कोई issue हो तो मैं तैयार हो गया. नहीं, ऐसे ही आ जाओ. I mean, he didn't tell me anything. So I spent a sleepless night wondering as to why does he want me. So next morning, I went to cabinet secretariat. And when I went to his room, he said, Anil, you have been drafted for a new assignment. So my heart sank actually. Because 2 years before that, I had been drafted to head the anti-Naxal wing of the country.
Okay.
So I thought, अब की बार तो कश्मीरी भेजेंगे मुझे कुछ है ऐसा. Then he said, नहीं, there is a lot of problem in clearance of projects. And a few days ago, Prime Minister, Finance Minister and I met, and we were looking for somebody who could fast track projects. And we thought of your name, so we picked up your name. Then I told him, sir, I have already completed 7 years, about to complete. I have to go back to the state. No, we have thought over it. We've decided to give you another extension. This was very unusual because 7 years the maximum that you can have here. But then I was gradually discovering that the government wants you, they will relax.
This is 2012.
This is 2013.
13.
So then I took over and there was nothing. I mean, it was from scratch that I set up the unit. What made it happen was the technology part. Because it was probably the first ever fileless, paperless office where if an industry had a problem, it would go to the portal and mention that problem, indicating the ministry where they had the problem. That problem would automatically go to a designated joint secretary in a ministry who was mandated to put his comment on the portal itself. So, he's absolute transparent. And then I used to have tripartite discussion, and only thing that I told the joint secretaries who came to my meeting was, take a decision, either way. Reject it.
Don't sit on it.
Don't sit on it. And you know what happened? In 15 months, we cleared projects worth 5 lakh crores. It was incredible. I couldn't believe it. And people asked me, how did it happen? I said, simple. No matter how inefficient I am to the public, I'd like to appear to be efficient. No one wants to appear inefficient. And here, since it was a transparent process where you could make out who's sitting on what for how much time, that did the trick. And I have always believed, I use this in coal also, fast track projects there as well, that the moment you bring transparency and technology can be very helpful, there is speed in clearance of projects. That's why in coal, we didn't have file of paper. It was all digitized. In education, it was all digitized. That helped. Technology helped.
So sunlight is the best disinfectant, basically. Once you
Absolutely.
get transparency,
Absolutely.
things will already...
Earlier, sunlight was there, but we didn't have instrument to expose it to light.
Yeah.
Now you have technology.
Yeah.
Since 20 years ago, we didn't have technology. We may wanted to be exposed, but today you can put everything in public domain. Much of my backside was saved as coal secretary was because every decision was placed on the portal. And it's not that we didn't commit mistakes, but they came to light and we corrected it.
Yeah.
So no one could attribute malafide to your decisions if you are transparent, and technology allows you to do that.
Any examples of projects that you can give from the PMG time which are
many
very
of them,
visible
but
now?
One in the beginning was a very interesting one. This problem came up, and a very unusual problem, that this Aero City which you see now, you have hotels there, that was not coming up because the security people have raised an objection that all the windows facing the airstrip will have to be closed. They have to be walled. You cannot have a window. Because it's a security risk. Now, how can you have a hotel room without a window? All facing this side. And there was huge fight going on between the Ministry of Civil Aviation and security people. This side walled over their windows facing the... I said, okay, let me find a solution. I mean, there's no yes or no to the problem. Find a solution. So, in the first meeting that I held, I heard them out. At that point in time, I had no clue. But when the second meeting started, I started with a very interesting statement. There were police people, police commissioner, Delhi people were sitting there, and civil aviation people. So I made a statement which had no direct relationship with what I was saying. I told them, this was in July, and I made the statement, I hear that the Prime Minister this year will be speaking from the ramparts of Red Fort behind a wall. He said, why? I said, I believe it's a security hazard. No, sir, they have bulletproof glass in front of the Prime Minister. Then I told them, why can't you put bulletproof glass on those windows and let those glasses be glasses? Yes, sir, that's a possibility, but the cost will go up. I said, every day delay is costing you a crore of rupees. If there is an additional cost of 1 or 2 crores in putting up those windows, isn't that a better option? I learned that there are no absolute right and wrong answers. The job is to find an answer to get things moving. Someone will find it absolutely foolish to put bulletproof glasses there. Yes, it might appear to be foolish, but then you continue to argue. The police wallas will say, no, you can't have it. They will say, you can have it. And there's no solution. So you have to find solution. There are many such interesting examples, but this was one of them.
Very, very interesting. In fact, everything that you're sharing here in terms of learnings, taking the stakeholders along, the power of communicating the value proposition, the satisfaction when derives from impact at scale, the transparency that you bring in and how that gets things moving, finding a middle path. This is so relevant and resonates so much with at least me, because the kind of work that we do requires exactly these things. So very, very powerful. And these are all kind of things that have been game changing in their own right. Before I get to your stint in the state, I know there's a lot of to kind of unpeel there as well. But before that, you've seen and worked with Prime Minister Modi. You've seen him from inside for around 4 odd years. And now for the last 4 to 5 years, you've also seen him from outside. So basis what you've seen of him, what's your reading of him as a leader? What are his strengths that you've seen?
I think he's one of the finest leaders that this country has had. I haven't had the occasion to work with too many prime ministers, but I've had the occasion to work with some chief ministers and I've seen some other prime ministers. I think he's probably one of the most decisive leaders that we've had in this country. And once he decides, then he carries it through. That is one. Second, contrary to the general impression, he's a very patient listener. In meetings, he hardly spoke. Otherwise, so eloquent in speeches and all. I gave you an example of Ayushman Bharat and RSBY, where he heard me out for 15 minutes without interrupting. Very patient listener. And he has his feet on the ground. So he understands the pulse of the people, what would be good for people. We may have disagreements, that's a different matter, that's normal. But he has the pulse of the people. And when he speaks so well. So, country is fortunate to have a prime minister like him. So, he can, whenever he decides, he can not only take decisions, he can carry them through, he can get people to get them through.
That's again a strong endorsement. But again, if I look at, I'm just digressing a little bit, if you look at social media and all, and with the views that you express in general on different matters, you get a lot of fire from all sides, right?
It's all right. See, I have been, as you said in the beginning, I have been outspoken. So when I say a person has these qualities, there are issues also. And I would not be the person to say that have yet to come across a perfect individual or institution. Yes. So there are problems. So I appreciate, I criticize. If I don't like a particular thing of an individual, of an institution, I will speak my mind out. Yeah. Now, what others say is that they say. They may have prejudice, they may have whatever they have in mind, they have their views. I couldn't care less. I am saying it on an assessment based on certain facts. Yeah. Yeah. I do not speak without facts. So, if factually I find some shortcomings in an individual or an institution, I'll state that for whatever it is worth. I did that when I was in the service, but then I didn't go to public with that. Yes. But internally, I am known to have. I used to speak my mind out. And my first meeting with Prime Minister Modi was some sort of disagreement. I remember I had taken over as Coal Secretary, and I was sitting there, a small group. Presentation was made by Power Secretary. And in the 6 slides that he presented, he mentioned that it was because of coal that Power had a problem. So the Prime Minister, my first conversation with him, he turns towards me, Anil ji, आपने देखा, आप कोल की स्थिति सुधार दीजिए, देश की आर्थिक स्थिति सुधर जाएगी. This is the first comment. So first time I'm conversing with him, and if I present a different opinion, I did that. I told him, sir, मैं आपसे सहमत हूँ. कोल की स्थिति बहुत गंभीर है, पर ये कहना उचित नहीं होगा कि कोल ही एक समस्या है पावर की और समस्या है, इसे हमें कॉम्प्रिहेंसिवली देखना पड़ेगा. He immediately nodded his head and turned toward the Power and Coal Minister, Mr. Piyush Goel, and told him, Anil ji सही कह रहे हैं, comprehensively देखना पड़ेगा. That helped me because I don't know whether rightly, erroneously or wrongly, Mr. Piyush Goel thought that I am close to the Prime Minister and I had an easy way as Coal Secretary. This was my first meeting. The last meeting was with regard to Ayushman Bharat. There again I had a different opinion. And he went on to agree with me. So it's not that I didn't have different opinion. I have often said that some of civil servants, have not had the courage enough to state facts to him. He's a politician, but I'm a bureaucrat. I should be having the conviction and the courage to state facts before him and then work out a solution. Sometimes I get a feeling that this is not being done, which is very unfortunate because, I mean, he may agree, he may get angry, that's his problem. But my job as a civil servant to state facts as they are, state my opinions for what they are without any bias, and then let a decision be taken. I should not be depriving the Prime Minister of my view. I felt that way, but that's a personal view.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We'll come to civil services and so on. That's a area that you personally very passionate about. Just taking with the Prime Minister, anything that you would want to see him do differently? You said there are strengths, there are kind of things
I used to share these thoughts with the PMO. The Prime Minister need not say things which either have not been done or announce things which won't be done. Because so much is happening, so much good is happening, that should be good enough for him to carry through. Why should he be speaking about things which are on occasions incorrect?
Examples?
I mean, I distinctly remember he announced from the ramparts of the Red Fort that the PMG was set up by the India government. Having been the first chairman of PMG, I said that was factually wrong. I'm just giving one example. There are many such examples where it is the job of the officers around him to point out to him that he doesn't have to, it is not even politically required. So why should he be speaking or saying things which are factually incorrect? That needs to be assessed by the office around him and tell him, sir, this is not required, this is incorrect. What is incorrect, as simple as that.
Yeah. Great. Let's shift gears a little bit and go to your stint in the state, your home state of Uttar Pradesh. That was also your cadre in the civil services. You were there in the Chief Minister's office or the Chief Minister's Secretariat for a fairly kind of longish time. Who are all the Chief Ministers that you worked with?
I worked with two Chief Ministers, Mr. Kalyan Singh and Madam Mayawati.
And I know I've heard you kind of say this in the past that Kalyan Singh was the tallest leader that you've worked with. And I'll just share my own reflection of him because growing up I used to kind of read politics, read about governance and so on. In my view, somewhere Kalyan Singh is the original Modi. Right, was the way I look at it, because what Mr. Modi was in the 2000s as the Chief Minister of Gujarat, you can draw parallels to it with what Mr. Kalyan Singh was in the 90s, both for the party as well as for the public discourse, because both of them very grassroots politicians, both of them have a strong mind of their own. I see both of them were known to be able administrators who could get things done. Both of them associated very closely with the right wing and have their own share of controversies. The only probably difference was that Mr. Modi was running a very stable government with full majority, whereas he was always mired in coalition governments and so on. So to me, that's the way at least I have the image of Mr. Kalyan Singh. A lot of the younger folks may not know him as well. But you say that he's the tallest leader you worked with. That's again a strong endorsement. Why do you say so? What were some of the traits?
Precisely the qualities that you mentioned. When I met Mr. Modi for the first time as School Secretary and I interacted with him, it reminded me of Kalyan Singh during his first stint. Decisive, straightforward, honest, deliverer. He had all those traits. A great administrator. So I found that in Mr. Modi as well. So I found huge amount of similarity between the two of them. Mr. Kalyan Singh would not compromise on anything which he thought was wrong.
Just share some examples.
First stint. I remember when I was, during my initial interactions with him, I was picked up as Director Information and Public Relations, which is a very important and sensitive position. When I had not even met him, he just picked me up. And I was told when the selection was going on, they were going through the gradation list. And when my name came for consideration, so this is hearsay, so I'm telling you what the secretary to the Chief Minister told me about my selection there. So he said, when your name came, we told him, sir, ये बहुत मुंहफट आदमी है, ये रोकेगा नहीं सर, सब कुछ बोल देगा. I had developed that reputation by then. Then he said, तब तो जरूर लाइए उनके यहाँ. So he was aware of my problems, and yet he got the problem over And I remember in the initial days, I used to go every morning as Director Information Public Relations to brief him about the media. Because that was my job. But in those days, television, etc., was not there. Only
मीडिया में क्या-क्या चल रहा है उस पर briefing.
So one morning when I visited his place, this was about a month into my new job. I entered his house, and for once I found him a bit flustered. Normally he was a very cool man. So there was Chief Secretary and the DGP standing there. He was sitting, and there was a conversation going on. When I entered, I heard Mr. Kalyan Singh say, "ये इतनी साथ बैठकें किसने लगा दी?" So I didn't know the context, so I stood there beside the Chief Secretary. मेरी तबीयत ठीक नहीं, मैं साथ नहीं कर सकता. Then I got to know this was about the election meetings that were to take place in by-election in Etawah. So both the Chief Secretary and the DGP was saying, हाँ सर आपकी तबीयत ठीक नहीं, आप साथ कैसे कर सकते हैं? तो मेरी आदत थी, मैंने कहा साहब ये तो आपका राजनीतिक प्रकरण है, लेकिन मैं कुछ दिनों पूर्व जिलाधिकारी था, डिस्ट्रिक्ट मजिस्ट्रेट था, तो सर चीफ मिनिस्टर आता है ज़िले में तो बड़ा सब जोश होता है लोगों में, बड़ी एक आशाएं अपेक्षाएं होती हैं, तो आप सर कैंसिल ना करके आप जाएं ज़रूर, लेकिन आप क्षमा मांग के बोले नहीं. तो उन्होंने घूर के मेरी तरफ देखा, आप क्या समझते हैं मैं 7 कर सकता हूँ? मैं तो 5 ही करूँगा. तो मैंने कहा साहब निर्णय आपका है, मेरा तो आपको राय देना है. अब नाउ चीफ सेक्रेटरी वॉज नजिंग मी लाइक दिस टू कीप क्वाइट. So after he said, Kalyan Singh, what he said, there was a pin drop silence for 15 seconds. And the chief secretary continued to nudge me, ab mat bolna. After 15 seconds, Kalyan Singh says, Anil ji, aap theek keh rahe hain. So the same chief secretary stopped nudging immediately. Haan sir, bilkul sahi keh raha hai. You know, I had forgotten this incident. Mr. Kalyan Singh, when he became chief minister again, it was then he narrated to me कि मैं आपको दोबारा अपना सचिव इसलिए बना के लाया हूँ क्योंकि आपने इसको रोका था. I was shocked. This man was perceptive, and then he explained to me, मैं तो अनिल जी निंदक नीरे राखिए आंगन कुटी छवाए. और मैं शुरू में समझता था तुम कैसे बोलते हो, मुझसे बोल देते हो, क्यों बोलते थे ऐसा? यार क्यों बोलते थे? मैंने कहा मुझे क्या था, मैं जो ठीक समझता था बोल देता था. मैं सर आपसे कह के तो आया नहीं था, आप मुझे निकाल देते, मैं चला जाता दूसरी जगह. तो हंसने लगे. So he was a tall man.
Got it. एक चीज़ जो उनके साथ बार बार जुड़ी आती है वो है बाबरी demolition. It's a controversial topic in the Indian history, but you were at the time working very closely. I think we were in the same role, in the same post.
Yes, I was in the same post on that.
So what's the
insider particular day, 6th of December, I was the only person with him in the morning. Usually it was a Sunday, I think. I went to his residence to brief him. He looked a bit flustered, upset, and contrary to the general impression, Kalyan Singh never wanted demolition of Badri Masjid because he was working towards other solutions. And that other solution is precisely what the Supreme Court finally decided. He was negotiating with the minority community leaders and telling them, आप वहाँ नमाज तो पढ़ते नहीं, तो जहाँ 12 साल नमाज नहीं करते तो मस्जिद तो बची नहीं, मैं आपके लिए भव्य मस्जिद दूसरी जगह बना दूंगा, आप उसको छोड़ दीजिए रामलला के लिए. And some segments were coming around. So he was discussing that. So I distinctly remember the conversations that he had on telephone with Mr. Advani on the other side. I couldn't hear what Mr. Advani was saying, but Mr. Kalyan Singh was very upset. Then he had a conversation with Mr. Bharat Singh, who was then the chief minister of Rajasthan. Kalyan Singh कहा, मैंने आपको मना किया था इनको इकट्ठा ना कीजिए, मैं तो इसका समाधान निकाल रहा था, मैं समाधान निकाल देता, आप सब लोगों ने इकट्ठा कर दिया लोगों को, देखिए क्या हो गया. And then what he did, he was classic. After talking, he said, "Anil एक कागज लाओ, भेज देता." बोले मैं अपना इस्तीफा लिख देता. And what he wrote on the paper was, इस पूरे प्रकरण का उत्तरदायित्व मैं स्वयं लेता हूँ, किसी भी अधिकारी या व्यक्ति को इसके लिए उत्तरदायी न ठहराया जाए. Of course, later on it was typed and sent to the governor. I don't know what language was used, but मेरे सामने उन्होंने हाथ से लिखा. So here was a politician who was prepared to take the entire responsibility of her happening. And I was juxtaposing him with a person who I otherwise admired, Dr. Manmohan Singh, that in all issue, he signed the file and he said, I was misled. How can you do that?
I really see that you really enjoyed your stint with Mr. Kalyan Singh. What's the most memorable incident that you remember from your interactions with him over the years?
This incident was when I was no more with him, so to say.
Okay.
I had been picked up as Export Commissioner, Government of India, and I had joined, and I'd gone back to Lucknow just to say goodbye to everyone, including Mr. Kalyan Singh. So I went to meet him to say a final goodbye. So on that particular day, he said that, Anil ji, आप मेरे साथ चलिए दिल्ली. So I was a bit, I didn't know how to react. मैं जा रहा हूँ स्टेट प्लेन से, आप साथ चलिए मेरे साथ. जैसी मैं आपसे कुछ सलाह करना चाहता हूँ.
Okay.
I don't know what was that salah, so I sat with him on the state plane. And while traveling from Lucknow to Delhi, he explained to me that he wanted to get rid of Mayawati. In those days, his government was being run with the support of Mayawati.
There was this arrangement, half,
6 months. So this was his turn now. और मैं कल अटल जी से मिलने जा रहा हूँ और मुझे कुछ बिंदु बनाइए आप. मैं उनके लिए पॉइंट्स बनाता था स्पीच के लिए, बोलते तो अपने आप थे, बिंदु बना देंगे. कुछ बिंदु बनाइए कि हमने प्रदेश में क्या क्या किया है और आगे क्या प्लान है, उससे मैं फिर चर्चा कर दूँगा. ठीक है, हम दिल्ली पहुँचे तो स्टेट गेस्ट हाउस में यहाँ पहुँच गए, तो वो अपने उसमें चले गए, मैं अपने कमरे में चला गया. मैं रात भर जगह बिंदु बनाता रहा. बनाई तो 5-6 पर्चियाँ, लेकिन रात भर लग गया उसमें काट पीट करते करते. सुबह 5-5:30 बजे तक मैंने काम अपना पूरा किया. वो 5 पर्चियाँ ले जाकर मैं चला गया नीचे. वो जल्दी उठते थे. मैं दरवाज़ा खटखटाया, वही आए, उनको मैंने 5 पर्चियाँ दी, मैं आगे सो गया. 10 बजे किसी ने मेरा दरवाज़ा खटखटाया कि मुख्यमंत्री जी आपको याद कर रहे हैं. तो मैं चला गया उनके पास. तो बैठे थे, बड़े रिलैक्स लग रहे थे. बोले अनिल आओ बैठो ना. मैं ज्वाइन कर चुका हूँ एज एक्सपोर्ट कमिश्नर, और बैठ गया वहाँ पर. अनिल वो तुमने पर्चियाँ दी थी, बड़ा काम आ गया, मैं आज अटल जी को समझाया हूँ, मैं मायावती से पीछा छुड़ा दूँगा. तो आई वॉज ऑल्सो वेरी हैप्पी फॉर हिम. आई सेड सर बहुत अच्छा है और मुझे पूरा विश्वास है सर कि आप ये प्रदेश की प्रगति होगी आपकी नेतृत्व में. बोले हाँ अनिल, मैं पूरा जोर लगा दूंगा इस प्रदेश को ठीक करने में. तो मैंने कहा साहब अब तो मैं आपके साथ नहीं हूँ, मैं कह सकता हूँ कि साहब मैं आपसे बड़ा प्रभावित हूँ, और इसलिए कह रहा हूँ अब कि अब मेरा आपसे कोई इस प्रकार का नाता नहीं है. मैं दिल्ली में हूँ और आपको दिमाग में रखते हुए मैंने पंक्तियाँ लिखी हैं. मैंने कहा आज मैं आपको समर्पित करूँ. तो मैंने ये पंक्तियाँ उनको पढ़ के सुनाई. समय रुका नहीं हम क्यों ठहर गए, समय रुका नहीं हम क्यों ठहर गए, अभी तो हम चले भी नहीं फिर क्यों थक गए. उठो पथिक मत भ्रमित हो, धूमिल अंधियारे में श्रेष्ठ वही जो घिरा नहीं हो क्षणिक निराशा में. जागो जगाओ मन मत बहलाओ, एक मसीहा तुम भी बन जाओ. मैंने जैसे ही ये पंक्तियां पढ़ी, कल्याण सिंह फपक के रोने लगे. I couldn't imagine, tears rolling from him. And then he said, अनिल मैं अपनी माँ की कसम खाता हूँ, मैं पूरा दम लगा दूंगा प्रदेश को सुधारने में. This was my last conversation with him. Thereafter I don't think I ever met him. But here was a gentleman who could do phenomenal things. He had it in him. But then life is what it is. Things keep changing over a period of time. But here was a man who had enormous potential to do what he could.
Very, very fascinating and very powerful. You also talked that you worked with Mayawati, very, very different, at least the public, this thing, very different person, very different character. How was that like in contrast to this?
It was chalk and cheese. It was very tough. I think those few months with Mayawati were perhaps the worst of my career.
You were in the CM office?
I was in the CM office. And I was watching what was happening.
What was happening?
And it was terrible. It was terrible. And I was so devastated that I wanted to quit. I wanted to go on leave, not work there. I remember I pushed my boss, साहब मुझे छुट्टी पे जाने दें. जब 2-3 बार मैंने उनसे कहा तो बैठो, बुलाया उन्होंने, ग्रेट ऑफिसर. ही सेड कि यार तुम ये एप्लीकेशन लिए घूमते हो, छुट्टी, तुम छुट्टी चले जाओ, हम भी छुट्टी चले जाते तो प्रदेश की छुट्टी कर देंगे. अरे हम और तुम हैं, कुछ और लोग हैं, कुछ इनको हम बांध के रखते हैं, कुछ काम करा लेते हैं इनसे ठीक ठाक, वरना तो बिल्कुल छुट्टा हो जाएगा मामला. तो तुम भी चले जाओ, छुट्टी फायदा क्या है, मैं भी छुट्टी चला जाता हूँ. And he was right actually. In number of cases, we used to get together the secretariat and get her to do the right things. And that is when I started discovering that no matter how good or bad the politician is, civil servants around that politician make a world of a difference. They can actually influence decisions. We did. I'll give you an example. It's a totally different example. There was an IS officer who was a district magistrate of a district, a very fine officer. ये नाराज हुए, उसको सस्पेंड कर दिया. वो उस दिन तो सस्पेंशन राज था, सस्पेंड कर दिया. अब वो रोता हुआ है मेरे पास कि सर मैंने तो कोई गलती की नहीं, एंड आई न्यू उसने कोई गलती नहीं की, सस्पेंड हो गया. अब उसको कैसे रीइंस्टेट करें, बिकॉज यू नो इट इम्पैक्ट्स द मोरल
ऑफ द एंटायर सर्विस, नॉट जस्ट द वन पर्सन.
तो हम लोगों ने स्ट्रैटेजाइज किया, वही करते थे हम लोग, वही उन्होंने एग्जाम्पल दिया. देखो उस दिन हमने क्या स्ट्रैटेजी किया कि वो मायावती जो थी जब सुबह ब्रेकफास्ट करती थी उस समय सबसे अच्छे मूड में होती थी. दिन भर कैसे मूड चेंज होता था, ब्रेकफास्ट टाइम पे फॉर व्हाट रीजन आई डोंट नो. तो हम लोग को जो भी ठीक काम कराना होता सुबह कराते थे. तो हम 4-5 लोग पहुंच गए सेक्रेटेरिएट कहाँ पर, और बड़े अच्छे मूड में थी. तो हमने कहा मैडम वो एक अधिकारी है, वो उसको गलती हो गई. वी न्यू उसकी गलती नहीं है, लेकिन उनसे कहें गलती नहीं है तो और झगड़ा करें. तो हमने कहा मैडम उससे गलती हो गई, अधिकारी बहुत अच्छा अधिकारी है, अच्छा अधिकारी है, हो जाती है थोड़ी बहुत, अच्छा ठीक है उसे वापस रखो. सो ही नरेटेड दिस इंसिडेंट टू मी. बोले देखो वो सस्पेंड रह जाता नहीं, तुम नहीं होते हम नहीं होते. तो इन्होंने मुझे समझा, यू नो आई वाज न्यू इन दिस सर्विस, कुछ साल की सर्विस हुई थी. बोले देखो कोई परफेक्ट सिचुएशन नहीं होती, तुम ये बिल्कुल ठीक आदमी के साथ काम करो, तुम्हें कहाँ मिलेगा ठीक. तुम क्या कर सकते हो उसमें कंट्रीब्यूट, ठीक काम कराने, महत्वपूर्ण. एंड दैट स्टेड विद मी बिकॉज देन दैट गेव मी अ लॉट ऑफ पीस. आई वाज लुकिंग कि ये नहीं है, गलत है, ये सही है, मतलब ब्लैक्स एंड व्हाइट्स में देख रहे थे. ही वाज टेलिंग मी कि उसी व्यक्ति से तुम अच्छा काम करा सकते हो, भाग के कैसे काम चलेगा.
So minimize damage.
Minimize. You can minimize. I mean, we did. There are many instances where we did. You know, I used to be shocked in one of the instances, a district magistrate. I was a day officer there. I was sitting there. A district magistrate, 1 year junior to me. I knew him very well. He came and he was carrying a briefcase with him. So उस समय तो मुझे समझ में नहीं आया. जब अंदर से वापस आया तो उसके हाथ में ब्रीफकेस नहीं था. तो मैंने कहा तुम ब्रीफकेस छोड़ा शायद अंदर. बोले नहीं उसमें कुछ फाइलें थी. हमने कहा डीएम कब से फाइल लाने लगा है सीएम के पास. डीएम का तो कोई फाइल का होता नहीं चक्कर, तुम क्या लिए गए. द वे ही स्माइल्ड एंड द वे आई न्यू व्हाट हैड हैपेंड. सो यू नो देयर वर मेनी सच इंस्टेंसेस which really upset me. What's this going on? So I told that young man, I told him, यार तुमने आज ये स्थापित कर दिया कि हम सब भी दे सकते हैं उनको. क्या, it's not a single case of what you've done. You conveyed to the politician that this is something which can be done, and then she will expect from others. So that is something which was very unusual. I mean, I used to feel terrible in that.
And you're not one to, I know you're not one to give up easily or to say that you'll kind of get into us, but you're saying that you're really considering long leave to kind of get outside of that situation.
Very rarely did I think on those lines, but that was the time when I felt terrible. There were 2 occasions. One this occasion, and another was when one of my ministers wanted me to suspend a deputy director. That was another occasion where an honest, efficient officer, and he was asking me to suspend him because mila nahi unse. I mean, they have been, in a service career of 38 years, you will come across occasions where you feel down and out. You know, people usually think that I was always upbeat, which I wasn't. You know, I was, when this minister asked me to suspend this officer, I was so distraught. You know, the real Kavi came out during that time. You know, I distinctly remember I wrote these lines. संशय नहीं मन में तेरी सृष्टि में या तुझ में. संशय नहीं मन में तेरी सृष्टि में या तुझ में. तू ही तू मेरे मन में समाया. सब कुछ मैंने तुझसे है पाया. फिर भी स्तब्ध हूँ, व्याकुल हूँ, अशांत हूँ, शायद अनजान हूँ. क्या यही जीवन है? जो पापी है, दुराचारी है, क्यों जीत रहा निरंतर है? स्पष्ट करो, अभिव्यक्त करो, कुछ तो करो मेरे राम. तो मैंने अपनी वेदना राम की झोली में डाल दी पूरी. So you know, there have been occasions where I've also felt.
So in all of these occasions, what's been the constant anchor in your life? What is something that you hold on to in these times of held on to in these low times?
समय रुका नहीं, हम क्यों ठहर गए. That was the anchor. This is something which sustained me, that there would be problems, but you can't lose your footing. And then times change. You can't have everything to your liking always. There would be times when things will not be to your liking. That is when your real character is brought out.
Yes.
When things are going good, your character is not brought to bear. It is when things are not going your way that is when your character is really tested.
And did you use poetry as a way to kind of express yourself? Of
Poetry
things
and
that
music.
Music.
I sustained me a lot. I used to jokingly tell people.
Do you sing? You play? What?
Yes, I used to jokingly tell everyone, instead of facing someone else's music, I composed my own, literally and otherwise. So I started composing music actually.
Okay. Okay.
So I loved it because that gave me peace of mind. You know, when I sit with my guitar, people ask me whether you meditate. I don't really meditate, I was in the traditional sense, no. But I meditate in my work, I meditate in my music, because when I'm sitting with my guitar, and if it's tuned properly, I'm totally absorbed in what I'm doing. Totally absorbed.
My bad, मुझे आपको बोलना चाहिए था कि गिटार या हम लाके रखता है गिटार, आपसे एक गाना भी सुनते साथ में.
I love music. I love music.
एक और चीज़ जो सिविल सर्विसेज में है कि किसी भी ऑफिसर की रेपुटेशन जो है पहले 5-7 साल में बन जाती है टिपिकली. ऑफ कोर्स यू हैव टू प्रोटेक्ट दैट, यू हैव टू बिल्ड ऑन दैट रेपुटेशन. बट एक रेपुटेशन व्हेन यू आर इन द डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स, आप एसडीएम होते हैं, सब डिविजनल मजिस्ट्रेट, डीएम होते हैं, डिस्ट्रिक्ट मजिस्ट्रेट, उस समय आपके कंडक्ट से, आपसे बिहेवियर से किस तरह का ऑफिसर है, एंड उसी के हिसाब से फिर आपको जो है चाहे वो पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप हो, चाहे आपकी ब्यूरोक्रेटिक लीड, वो देखते हैं और उसी हिसाब से पोस्टिंग्स भी मिलती है. आपकी रेपुटेशन कब बनी एक अपराइट ऑफिसर की, एक ऑफिसर विद इंटीग्रिटी की, आपके इनिशियल ईयर्स में?
I don't know when that reputation got built, but I distinctly remember that I used to have these dilemmas in the beginning whether I should do this or that. After 10 years, I didn't have dilemmas in my mind. I had that clarity of thought, this is right, this I'll do, I'll pay a price.
And you paid the price?
I paid, on a number of occasions I paid a price. On a number of occasions I was awarded. It was very unusual. You know, when I was young, a kid, I used to feel very frustrated because till class 7, I did not win a single award. No certificate, no medal, no trophy, no cup, nothing. So my mother used to tell me, तुम्हारा time आएगा, क्यों परेशान होते हो? And then she used to say this phrase which I didn't understand at that point in time. कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन. समझ में नहीं आता था क्या बोल रही हैं. It dawned on me much later in life. I remember I was posted as SDM Hardoi, earlier part of my career, and Mrs. Indira Gandhi had been assassinated, 1984. All hell broke loose. You know, members of ruling party were indulging in arson and looting, and at the receiving end were a minority community. So as sub-division magistrate, it was my job. I used to go around the city and keep everything in order. When I got this intelligence that a very powerful local MLA, very, very powerful, was behind these arson. So the dilemma was whether I should take action against him. That was a huge dilemma in the beginning. Finally, I decided that I will. And I made out an NSA case, National Security Act case, and sent it to the district magistrate because he's the deciding authority. This got to be known to this MLA. He spoke to someone in Lucknow and I was summoned to Lucknow. A senior officer asked me कि यार तुमने क्या कर दिया है? तो explained to him कि मैंने ये किया. तो he said हाँ ठीक तो है लेकिन फाइल वापस ले लो. हमने कहा फाइल तो डीएम को डिसीजन लेना, वो रूल नहीं तुम्हारे हित में है, ले लो वापस. मेरे साहब मैंने तो भेज दी, तीर निकल गया साहब, अब क्या वापस लेंगे उसको. तो मैं चला आया, मेरा ट्रांसफर हो गया. सो आई वाज शॉक्ड. आई सेड ये क्या, मैंने सही काम किया, मेरा ट्रांसफर हो गया. सो यू नो आई वाज पेइंग अ प्राइस. 7 years down the line, I myself became a district magistrate in Lakhimpur Kheri, and here a similar sort of situation arose. The district president of the ruling party wanted to take out a funeral procession as a consequence of a murder. So I told him, ये तो आप ही की सरकार है, आप इसमें communal charge environment है, communal rights हो जाएंगे. नहीं हम निकालेंगे. तो हमारे पास no option. I put him behind the bars. In the evening, the chief minister rang me up. कि डीएम साहब आपने क्या किया? मैंने कहा साहब मैंने इस वजह से बंद किया. बोले नहीं उसको तो छोड़ना. मैंने कहा साहब छोड़ना उचित नहीं होगा. तो हमसे बोले कोई तरीका बताइए. मैंने कहा साहब या तो आप बात कीजिए, कोई बात करें, उनको समझाया कि साहब ये निकालेंगे तो कम्युनल राइट हो जाएगा. तो ये अपीयर्ड वेरी अनहैप्पी, पुट द फोन डाउन. आई टोल्ड माय वाइफ कि वहाँ हटा था, यहाँ भी हटेंगे अगले दिन सुबह. मेरे पास फोन आया कि नहीं साहब वो तैयार हो गए कि फिनल प्रोसेशन नहीं निकालेंगे. मैंने कहा छोड़ दो उसको. मेरा कोई व्यक्तिगत वैमनस्य तो था नहीं उससे, छोड़ दिया उसको. Now this is not the end of the story. 2 months or 3 months down the line, the same chief minister who was so annoyed with me awarded me as one of the finest district magistrates of the state. तो मैं लोगों को बताता हूँ यार वो भी वही था, ये भी वही था. वहाँ तो मैंने बंद नहीं किया था, सिर्फ एनएसए का भेजा था, मेरा ट्रांसफर हो गया. या मैंने उसे बंद कर दिया, मुझे बेस्ट वन ऑफ द फाइनेस्ट डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैजिस्ट्रेट का अवार्ड मिल गया. कर्म अपना करते चलो. यू नो ग्रेजुअली इन लाइफ आई स्टार्टेड अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि मैं पल में मजा लेता रहूं जिससे मैं कर रहा हूं, बाकी तो पता नहीं यार रिजल्ट क्या आना है, उस पर तो कोई अख्तियार है ही नहीं. देन आई रियलाइज कर्मण्येवाधिकार, पहले तो समझ में नहीं आता था क्या है. कर्म करते रहो, मस्त रहो, एंड आई एंजॉयड माई लाइफ मच मोर देयर आफ्टर. एंड सेकेंड थिंग व्हाट हैपेंड, I remember that after the initial 10, 12 or 13 years, I can't keep account, I don't recall any politician or anybody asking me for a favor which was incorrect.
That's the repetition.
I mean, it is amazing. I look back, except one incident, much later in my life, I can't think of anybody coming to me. लोग कहते हैं नेता का दबाव, अरे दबाव ही नहीं आता था, उसको पता है मैं काम नहीं करूँगा, क्यों करेगा? So what you say कि आपकी reputation initial years में बनती है, फिर हो सकता है आपको वहां पोस्टिंग ना करें, फिर मेरा अधिकार थोड़ी ना हर पोस्टिंग पे पहुंचने का. लाइक आई कीप टेलिंग माय कोलीग्स, यार 38 साल की सेवा में आई नेवर वेंट टू एनी पॉलिटिशियन फॉर एनी फेवर, एटलीस्ट नो पर्सनल फेवर. ऑफिशियली तो मैं जैसे खरगे साहब से मिला था, मुझे बिल का सपोर्ट चाहिए, दैट्स अ डिफरेंट मैटर, बट नो पर्सनल फेवर. व्हाई शुड आई गो टू एनी पॉलिटिशियन? अरे जहां सरकार पोस्ट कर देगी, मैं तो अक्सर ये कहता था यार IAS अफसर के लिए तो हर पोस्ट बड़ी बढ़िया है यार, मुझे बता दो कौन सी बढ़िया नहीं. और जहां जाओ वहां अपना you create a niche for yourself, create a situation where you can do it, and that's much more enjoyable. आपको माल पानी में ऑलरेडी है तो क्या मजा, आप बनाओ ना वहां जाकर. That's a greater challenge, it's greater sense of satisfaction कि बिल्कुल डूबी हुई थी, हमने उसको ठीक कर दिया.
And that also gets me to post retirement, and just again थोड़ा सा मैं digress कर रहा हूँ conversation में, district की बात कर रहे हैं, but someone like you, one would expect कि आप रिटायरमेंट के बाद भी the government will kind of leverage your services to kind of get some things done. That has not happened. You are doing a lot of things. You are writing books. I'll talk about them also. I have the books actually यहाँ पर. तो उनकी बात मैं करूँगा. But there's no post-retirement government this thing that you have. What's the reason for it? Is it also this nature of yours?
I don't know. But I found it below my dignity to apply for a government job. And all government jobs are available on application.
Is it?
You have to apply. And then you have to pursue. That's the second step. That is even worse. I'm not averse to people taking up post-retirement assignment. And even I have been called by central and the other governments to head committees to do some work, which I've been doing. But I hate to apply for a job. Second, which I did not realize immediately after retirement, I love my freedom now. I really love my freedom. I don't know whether now if an offer comes from the government again for a long-term assignment or permanent assignment,
will you even take it up?
Whether I'll take it or not, I can't say for sure, but I will have to debate quite a lot because I'm loving my present existence. While in service, I loved every moment, but I never thought that post-retirement would be as good as it has turned out to be. So God has been kind. I have loved post-retirement existence. I love this freedom. I loved interacting with people around. I go around the country talking to almost every week. I go to some place and interact with them. I love it.
Yeah. You also use your time well. आपने मतलब ये सारी books भी लिखी हैं. So
I did not have too many ambitions in life. One such ambition was to write a book. Because I used to read a lot, and I thought I must have one book at least in my name. So I started working on my first book, not just a civil servant, while in service. It got published after that. I thought that would be over. But then I loved writing so much, then I came up with the second one, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant. And the third one was as a consequence of what I went through in 2020. I had some health issues. I became immobile. I was confined. So I utilized that time to write my third book, No More a Civil Servant.
No, I would say these are almost like the thesis or the Bible or the Gita for civil servants. That's the way I look at it, because in not just the civil servant, you talk about your journey as a civil servant. In the ethical dilemmas, you really get deep into those things that the civil servant, the dilemmas one goes through and how to think about it. Maybe that's coming from the initial years that you spent, what you were just sharing. And of course, No More a Civil Servant is post what you've done after retirement. But these are kind of, I've read some of it. It's very, very good books. Highly, highly recommended. I want to also talk about your views on civil services and civil servants, because that's one topic that you speak a lot about. You mentor a lot of young civil servants. You also mentor people who are aspiring to be in civil services. But there's some views that I've heard from you at different points in time. I want you to elaborate on that. One is you say that it pays to be honest in the civil service. It's not just a moral and ethically the right thing to do. It also is it pays to be honest. Just elaborate on that.
It's very simple. we were discussing about the reputation in officer. Your life becomes that much easier if you're honest. Why? Because first, those dishonest people will not come to you. You will be able to do what you want to do. And second, on a more practical front, you could probably afford to be dishonest till the 90s. Today, you can't. The world has opened up. The social media has opened up. Your truth will be revealed. So if you think that you can get away with dishonest practices, very difficult. You will get to be known. Earlier, I've come across officers who were very abrasive about their own dishonesty. They thought they would never get caught. I come from state of UP where 2 chief secretaries were put behind the bars. So today, it is practical to be honest. Because more than anything else, you'll be caught. First, of course, if you are honest, then there will be a lot of reverence for you. There is a lot of regard for you. And I keep telling everyone that your true worth will be determined after you retire, not before. पहले तो आप जहाँ बैठे कहेंगे साहब आपसे अच्छा अधिकारी ना आया है ना आएगा, हर जना आपको पंप करता रहेगा. But the respect that you get post retirement is incredible because that's the true respect. So it pays to be honest.
एक और चीज़ आप बोलते हैं which I completely believe in is it's important to deliver and not just be honest, because you can be honest but your job is not to be honest. That's the basic expectation. The job is to really get things done for the people. Again, a little bit on you from that.
I have always believed that honesty is a necessary condition for a good civil servant, but honesty alone is not enough. He has to be efficient. He's paid to deliver. The tragedy of it, some of the honest officers is that they think that the rest of the world is dishonest. That is the biggest tragedy, and that inhibits quick and effective delivery. So they smell a rat everywhere. They themselves don't take decisions. They don't allow others to take a decision. They think decision making will make them dishonest, which is a shocker. I don't think that is the right way of going about it. Honesty has to be there. I mean, आप किसी पे एहसान नहीं कर रहे हैं honest होकर.
Exactly. Yes.
Honest तो आपको होना ही है, but you are paid to deliver. You're not paid to be honest. Honesty is a prime requirement. The primary requirement is honesty. But your salary that you get is to deliver on the ground. The common man on the ground expects action. So that is why I say that honesty alone is not enough. People, some of them misinterpret, no, honesty is everything. I said, fair enough, you can have a different opinion on that. But for a civil servant, he has also to deliver.
Yes.
That's also his primary responsibility.
Can't agree more. एक और टॉपिक जो चलता है वो है सिविल सर्विसेज में जनरलिस्ट वर्सेस एक्सपर्ट्स. एक सेट ऑफ पीपल इनका मानना है कि यू नीड एक्सपर्टीज टू बी एबल टू डिलीवर, स्पेशली व्हेन इट कम्स टू द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया लेवल, सीनियर लेवल्स, टू डू पॉलिसी, टू काइंड ऑफ design schemes and so on. There's another segment which believes that that's not the main requirement. You can leverage expertise of others. You need to be a good leader. You need to be you need to kind of get work done from others, right, etc. And therefore expertise is not that critical. Being a generalist, being a good manager, being a good leader is what is more important. I know you also fall in this second category. Again, can you explain why? Because that's a debate, that's an ongoing debate.
This is also very simple. And simple because you can outsource expertise, but you can't outsource attitude. So if you don't have an attitude of a leader, no matter how good an expert you are, you will fail in leadership positions, especially in the IS, where you acquire leadership positions right from the beginning. When you are a subdivisional magistrate in a subdivision, you are a leader of that subdivision. So what sort of expertise I am looking at? To my mind, at least, I mean, I have a different opinion with a number of people. What is required is your ability to manage men and women. And then some attributes of a leader. You have to have a vision. You have to be visionary. You have to have courage. You have to have appreciation. You should be able to appreciate, manage that team, give credit to others and take the flak for the loss. You have to trust people. You have to delegate. You have to empower. Now, these are the attributes which you have to cultivate over a period of time and understand the importance thereof. If you want expertise, I can tell you from my personal experience, I had no experience whatsoever in code, which is a very, very technical subject. I thought I did reasonably well. because I did manage to get, a good leader will be able to outsource expertise. Now, when we talk of expertise, what expertise am I talking of? Say, take for example, Finance Secretary, Government of India. Should he be expert in banking, insurance, budgeting? What expertise are we talking about?
You cannot be.
You cannot, and you should not. Then you start fighting with an expert. The roles have to be defined clearly. You should create an environment where expertise can flourish. I am not saying that an expert cannot be a leader. What I am trying to say is this debate is useless. You look at private sector, where people who reach the top are not expert in a particular area. They are expert as managing men and women. I mean, how much does this engineering expertise does Ratan Tata use? None. So it is not a question of becoming expert in an area. It is a question of your ability to manage women. And I am very clear in my mind, by bringing this debate of expertise, we are trying to make IAS officers experts and not failing in their duty. So if I were to do things, first, in the selection process itself, I would get potential leaders. There are tools available where you can get them. You have to test the attitude. I mean, they may fail in 20% cases, but at least 80% would be leaders, potential leaders. Then in training, you don't have to train to make them experts. You have to demonstrate, illustrate to them that this sort of an attitude works. How to cultivate those traits, that has to be told. While nurturing these officers, while nurturing them, don't tell them how artificial intelligence has to be used. And don't make them experts in C++. No, they don't have to be. They have to understand how to get that C++ guy, how to get that AI guy, how to give him space, how to give him protection, how to give them the credit, and they will perform for you. I mean, as I keep saying, I did that as coal secretary. I didn't know how coal has to be dug. I didn't need to know the difference between one quality of coal and another quality of coal. It was not needed.
It's the same in every sphere, even the startup world. Any founder that you look at today is not an expert in the area that they're kind of working in or the problem that they're trying to solve.
There I would say something. When you start your career, you have to learn so many things.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, you have to go into the details of everything. But as you go up the ladder, there more and more your leadership skills. Your expertise may be required in a particular segment that you're working to begin with. But as you go up the ladder, I think attitude matters much more than expertise.
Yeah. And it's not just about selection and training. It's also after that, the mentoring process. Nurturing, that's the thing, nurturing. That's some would argue, and I also sometimes feel not enough happening in the services.
No, it is not happening. No, not enough.
Yeah, it's not happening.
Unfortunately, I have come to this conclusion that at least the IS does not have an ethos of its own. Every individual on his own. And that is where I compliment Mr. Modi for getting the secretaries together. He's trying to break those, silos that are there. And I was part of some of this exercise. Phenomenal. Interacting with others. The whole idea of getting the IS was that you should pick up the phone, talk to your colleague there and get things moving. Now, if I build my own walls, then what is the purpose of having the IS? The IS was that you are colleagues. So what I may be wrong, but my view is that at a personal level, our connect is very good with IS. But when it comes to professional connect, I think we have our own empires. And that's where the problem is. And that's what the Prime Minister was trying to do. Get these people together, break the silos. That's the advantage of the IS. There again, expertise doesn't help. Your attitude to get people along, to work along with people, to work as a team. What has that to do with expertise in the traditional sense?
Yeah, and that's happening, continues to happen even now. There's Chintan Shivir, different topics, different people coming together, brainstorming happening, almost like it happens in the private sector. Very similar things are happening.
Yes.
All right. Now I'll come to a topic which is very close to my heart, which is the young talent in the country. People who are still studying, students, young professionals working in any sphere. The best minds in the country, basically, if you look at them, they can broadly, there was a time when the best minds would go to IAS 30 years back, at the time that you joined services at that time. Today, they have a lot of options. Options in the corporate world, in the startup world, etc., a lot of options that people have today, and therefore it's gotten spread out. Broadly, if I see two segments of people who are working in the impact space, could be through the civil services, could be from outside of the services, organizations such as ours, and many others. That's one segment. And there are people who are working in the corporate world, in the startup world. It's not that no impact is getting created there. There also impact gets created, but it's more direct, it's indirect. It's not intentionally being done, right? It's happening as a byproduct. But this segment is much, much larger than this one. There are many reasons that people, sometimes young talent may feel why not to engage with the government, why not to work with the government. And let me touch upon a couple of them. One is this general sense that all the ills that we are facing as a country is on account of the system, right? Anything that you have to say on that? That's a general mindset, not the full everyone, but a segment that believes that.
You know, the best way of absolving yourself of the wrongs around you is to blame somebody else for it. उम्र भर यही भूल करता रहा गालिब, धूल चेहरे पे थी आईना मलता रहा. No, this is not a Ghalib share attributed to Ghalib, but has a lot of meaning. That's very easy. It made me comfortable. Yes. यार मेरी गलती तो नहीं थी, ये तो सिस्टम ऐसा है. And I found very senior officers also saying system की गलती. ये सिस्टम अंग्रेज छोड़ गया क्या? अब तो आप ही बना रहे हो ना सिस्टम. So my answer to that is identify that area where you can and start with that. For example, when I speak to my colleagues, I ask them, यार तुम हर चीज के लिए नेता को बदनाम करते हो, ये बताओ किस नेता ने तुमसे कहा कि ऑफिस देर से आओ? तो क्यों आते हो? किसी नेता ने तुमसे कहा अपना ऑफिस गंदा रखो? नहीं, क्यों गंदा रखो? किसी नेता ने तुमसे कहा कि जो तुमसे मिलना है उसे बदतमीजी से बोलो, उसको बाहर इंतजार कराओ, करते हो? You can go on and you will find that a large number of areas where politician or the system is not involved. It's totally dependent on you.
Yes.
So why don't you do what you can? And then I say that if you concentrate on what you can, that can will grow.
Sphere of influence.
Sphere of influence. But instead of focusing on what you can, you focus on what you can't and spend those 24 hours in mulling over, debating over areas over which you have absolutely no control. What is the big deal in spending time over issues over which you have no control? That's the biggest tragedy of our existence.
Yes, no, that's what I wanted to. I completely believe in that, and good that you're saying that so eloquently. The second thing that comes in mind often, again, we'll talk to people who are not coming in this space, is यहाँ चीजें move नहीं होती हैं. Idea होता है, but idea doesn't get fructified. And I know you have a very solid framing of that. I want you to share that and explain that also. Right? When does something gets to action?
You know, in India, the problem is there's no dearth of ideas. I call them Rai Sahab. You know, they have advisors, advice. But वो कैसे होगा किसी को नहीं पता. It's not easy to get things done in a democracy, because any idea to fructify and sustain over a period of time, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. So these are the 7 roadblocks in making an idea happen. The idea of telling this is not to prevent anybody from delivering that idea, for making it happen, but to keep that in mind while going ahead with implementing a particular idea. So for example, political acceptability. A bigger decision cannot be taken in a democracy until politicians buy into that idea. So the job of the person who's presenting to a decision maker is to package that idea in a manner that it becomes acceptable. Because until that happens, it won't sustain. It may happen short run, it won't scale. So if it has to scale and sustain, it has to be politically acceptable. Socially desirable, again, you have to keep in mind your client. The ultimate consumer. I gave an example of RSB. Why RSB was succeeded? Because though initially people do not appreciate the social desirability of it, we managed to convince them it is useful to them. So it is not necessary for an idea to be upfront socially desirable. Through your communication skills, you can make it desirable. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is a classic example where people may not have appreciated to begin with, but through communication and other publicity, they managed to convince people that it is socially desirable, and it happened. Then it has to be technologically feasible. Until the appropriate technology exists, you can't make an idea happen. This is not to say that you can't get that technology. Understand the requirement and the necessity and the appropriateness of a technology, and then go ahead with it. Fourth, perhaps the most important, is financial viability. मैं मजाक में कहता हूँ जेब में नहीं पत्ता चल दिया कलकत्ता. Until you have the desired amount, how can you get an idea happen? It can happen. Now, if the idea is strong and you build the right base, then the money keeps coming. I mean, I tell people, in the first 2 years of RSBY, I found it very difficult to get money. From third year onwards, the joint secretary budget one day before the budget used to ask me, कितना चाहिए बॉस आपको? और जितना मैं बता देता उतना पैसा मिल जाता था. तो मैं अक्सर कहता हूँ आइडिया को इतना बड़ा करो, अपने को इतना बड़ो करो. As I say, खुद ही कुकर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से खुद पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. So you make that idea so bright and brilliant that people ask you, अरे भाई इसको करने के लिए क्या चाहिए? So it's not that it can't happen, but you have to have that in mind. Then of course I talk in terms of administrative doability. Now this is very important. Why? Because it relates to human resource. No matter how much money you have, but if you don't have the appropriate human resource sitting there, this I discovered in education, health. Until you have the people sitting there, it won't happen. So you have to make arrangement for that. Then judicial tenability. I mean, I won't speak much about it. It's a very touchy matter. I faced 36 contents in the beginning of my career, and I still feel this is one part which I couldn't sort out. को कूट किस इस तरह एक करबड़ बैठेगा, इस करबड़ बैठेगा, पता नहीं क्या डिसीजन ले लेगा, पता नहीं, है ना. So I won't elaborate it. But what I tell my colleagues is, whenever you do something, look at whether it is unconstitutional, illegal. वो part देख लो, because unnecessarily वो घुसेंगे तो आप काम नहीं कर पाओगे. इसी तरह finally emotionally relatable. This dimension was added later when the farms legislation came in, and this came in because if you are unable to convince the clientele that what you are saying is useful to them, then no matter all things are being there, it won't happen. And farms bill, to my mind, was very useful to the farmers, but probably were not able to convey it to the farmers. Yeah. So this is emotional relatability.
Very powerful, very powerful. In fact, since I have you and I get back to these young professionals working in different spheres in life, what would be your pitch to them to devote their life towards the impact space, be it inside the services or outside? If you were to kind of make a pitch to that young talent out there, what would that be like?
No, I would ask them, you have to determine yourself what you want in life. That is the first question everyone has to answer. What do you want to do in life? You want to make money, more money, or you want money to live comfortable life and get something else? That else he has to define and see what else. Because during the course of conversation with you, I talked about that kick. The question is, everyone has to discover his own kick. What gives you a kick? More money, or the numbers in your bank account which you never use, but every morning you get up and see, oh, it's now 1,000 crore, oh, it's become 1,500 crore. So that gives you a kick, fair enough. You have to decide for yourself what gives you a kick. I discovered in my life that my kick was doing good to others. That gave me enormous amount of kick. And that enjoyment, that sense of satisfaction kept growing. So much so that post-retirement, I continued to do that. Because that gives me a kick. Now, I can't tell others that you should do this. Jo paave wahi jane. So you have to experience that kick in order to believe in what I'm saying, that this gives you enormous amount of sense of satisfaction, which no amount of bank account can do it. Now, I don't want to say that you should lead a penurious life or live like a beggar or something. No, make money, but decide for yourself how much. Yeah. Because if you don't limit that, then you won't have the other sense of satisfaction. So that is one. Then, in order to do that, what are the avenues available for you to derive satisfaction about what you're doing? Obviously, I rate the IS at the top of the shack, and if you can make it to it, nothing like it, it provides you enormous potential. But what are the other avenues? Other avenues could be, for making money, you can go to the private sector. For making money, you can come to the government sector. A lot of opportunities to make money. Then you decide, what do you want in life? If you want to impact people, and that I'm coming to this point because the amount of satisfaction that you can derive out of impacting the lives of people, who many of whom are helpless, is absolutely amazing. So if you want to do that, then there are other avenues available where you don't lead a difficult life. You have a reasonable amount of money to live comfortably, but you can do a lot of good to others. I say that because many of us do many things to impress others. And at a digression, I would like to narrate an incident. I had often wondered why people buy Mercedes car. Because in Delhi, I have yet to come across anybody who owns a Mercedes car driving himself. It is driven by the driver. So all the pleasure of driving is with the driver. And the rear seat of Mercedes is fairly uncomfortable. I have sat in a number of them. तो क्यों खरीदता है? वो पड़ोसी के लिए खरीदता है. So that is the problem. Now, much of my money goes in impressing others with what I have, but I may not necessarily need. So I am not accumulating money for my needs. I am accumulating money for my greed. And this is not ethics or honesty. It's very practical. आप उस में क्यों जा रहे हैं उस एरिया में, और जो व्यक्ति को आप इंप्रेस करना चाहते हैं, he may be impressed, but he doesn't like you. He's not very happy at being impressed with you. So why are you trying to impress him? Impress yourself. तो जो आपकी जरूरत है, जो आपको अच्छा लगे, like a friend of mine who was an industrialist, his son has a Ferrari. I was not aware. No one knows. वो संडे की सुबह 5 बजे जाता है, चला के आता है, खड़ा कर देता है. No one knows that he has a Ferrari. I am happy because he's happy with this Ferrari. He's not using the Ferrari to road show कि बड़ी जो बर्र करके चल रही हो, अपना मस्त होकर चलाता है. You do it for yourself. So now each one will have to discover what do you want for yourself, and that conversation they should have with somebody. There, I think now enormous avenues exist to contribute to the society and derive enormous sense of satisfaction. Such opportunities are available, which perhaps at my time were not available. At that point in time, या तो आप झोला छाप बन जाइए. You don't have to necessarily become a झोला छाप.
Yes.
You can actually lead a good life, yet derive satisfaction out of. I see a lot of evidence of this happening. Many people are leaving their jobs in the US, coming back and attempting to derive that sense of satisfaction here in India.
And we at Samagra are trying to provide exactly that avenue where you don't have to kind of let go of all of those things in life. You can have a very, very decent, well-paying kind of this. At the same time, get that kick that you are talking about. If you get that kick from impact, if you get that kick satisfaction from doing good to others. So that's exactly the thesis basically at Samagra as well. So fully resonate with what you're saying. A fascinating conversation, Mr. Swarup. This can continue endlessly. So we have so much of, in these 38 years of yours, you've gathered so much of rich experience, so many anecdotes, so many stories, so much of wisdom, I would say. It's extremely valuable. I just request you to end with some poem that comes to your mind. Either you have written it or you kind of, you also have something on civil servants, I remember. But it's up to you. You can share.
The lines that continue to inspire me are from a film. And to me, that's the finest song and finest words. किसी की मुस्कुराहटों पे हो निसार, किसी का दर्द मिल सके तो ले उधार, किसी के वास्ते हो तेरे दिल में प्यार, जीना इसी का नाम.
Thank you so much, sir.